In this video, I'd like to try to give my overall thoughts on the 8-volume manga series Buddha by Tezuka Osamu. Now, if you've been watching this channel, I've been doing mini reviews of each individual volume of this series as I finish it. But of course, those thoughts have been incomplete because I didn't know where the whole story was going. I hadn't read it in its entirety before. So it's just my individual thoughts as I finished each volume. Now that I finished the whole series, I can perhaps get some more perspective on it and look back and give some overall thoughts on all 8 volumes. A couple disclaimers before we get into it. One, unfortunately, I'm sick at the moment. I've got a cold. I actually have one of these Fisherman Friends lounges in my mouth right now. I've been coughing all morning, etc. Sorry about that. I'm at the stage of my life. I've got 3 jobs and 2 kids. And if I have 30 minutes free in my afternoon to make a video, I just go for it, no matter what condition I'm in, because you never know when that time is going to come again. As always, feel free not to watch. This is just where I'm at right now, so I'm going to plow ahead and try and make a video. Secondly, and second disclaimer, I'm going to be repeating a lot of the things I've said in my individual reviews of each volume, trying to tie those together. So I guess my suggestion would be watch one or the other. So I'll link to everything down below, but that doesn't necessarily mean you need to watch it. If you've been watching those individual reviews, you'll just find a lot of the same thoughts repeated in this overall review. Probably if you watch this overall review, you'll find a lot of the same things repeated that I've been saying all along in the individual video reviews. Now, I want to say that this final review represents my thoughts a little bit more cleaned up and streamlined, etc. Except I never script these things. So because this is unscripted, I'm prone to all the things the problems I usually have, losing my train of thought, going off on tangents, etc. So I never know how these things are going to turn out when I turn on the camera. I guess we'll see. So let's jump into it. I'm going to give some brief background first on what this manga series is, then on my history with it, and then I'll try and give some overall thoughts about the series. So what this is, this manga is by Tezuka Osamu, or Osamu Tezuka, depending if the Japanese word order and the English word order is reversed, who has various epithets. Is epithet the correct word? He's been called the godfather of Japanese manga. He's been called the Walt Disney of Japan, etc. He was a huge manga artist in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and early 80s. I believe he died in the mid 80s. Who was just incredibly prolific, did so much manga and anime, and had a whole studio at one point. And I've heard from Japanese friends, I'm not sure, I've not independently looked this up myself, but a lot of his manga, especially later in life, was just done like as on an assembly line. Like he would do the rough sketches, but then he would have tons of assistants filling it in for him, which is why he was able to be so prolific. But at any rate, just did tons of stuff. Now he's not quite so well known outside of Japan, aside from manga and anime aficionados, and I think that's largely just because he died before manga went international. You know, if he had had his heyday in the 90s or the 2000s when this stuff was being read all around the world, maybe he'd be better known today. But inside Japan, his stuff is still being reprinted and read, at least when I lived there, which was from 2001 to about 2009. Um, I'll get more into my own history later. So Buddha, according to Wikipedia, was serialized from 1972 and ended in 1983. So I guess a period of 11 years. It doesn't say this explicitly in Wikipedia, but I believe that the standard distribution model for all of these comics was that there was various comic omnibuses, which were sold in the newsstands or wherever in Japan. There was the shonen for young boys, and I think it was shogai for young girls, or I forget. I might be getting my Vietnamese and my Japanese mixed up. Anyways, um, so Tezuka Osamu wrote for both magazines, but I think the majority of his stuff would go in the Shonen magazine. Uh, and this magazine came out every month or so, and would have a variety of different stories by a variety of different artists that were being serialized. And so I think Buddha would appear in there each month or whatever it was until the story was completed. And then it was since collected in hardcover or whatever. It was translated into the U.S., into English. Doesn't say in Wikipedia, but I think, excuse me, that's the lounge going around my mouth. 2003 or 2004. According to Wikipedia, it won the Eisner Award in 2004 and 2005. So translated into English around that time. I'll come back to this later, but I get the impression that it's much more popular in English translation than it is in Japanese translation. That's just my subjective impression. But yeah, let me talk about my own history with it. So I got into this. I was living in Japan from 2001 to 2009, and was trying to learn Japanese while I was there, and also was getting interested in various aspects of Japanese culture. Now, a disclaimer I want to make at the top of this video, which should keep in mind for the whole of the video, is I'm not really an expert. And if you've ever lived abroad or taught English abroad, hopefully you'll know what I mean. You dabble a little bit in the culture of your host country. You read a bit of this and a little bit of that, but you don't really have a deep understanding of anything. I may, in the course of this video, give some of my subjective impressions, but take everything I say with a grain of salt. I'm not an expert on it. But that being said, I did discover Tezuka Osamu. He was referenced in a couple of the books I was reading about Japan. I think one of the books I was reading about Learn Japanese even recommended his comics as a good way to learn Japanese. And I was predisposed to read comics anyways. I've been a big comic fan in my youth. And comics really are a wonderful way to study a language because the visuals give you so much support. So if you don't know what an individual word is, you just look at the picture and you guess. Or even if you can't guess, you just keep going because the pictures are carrying a lot of the story. So it's you never completely lose the thread of what's happening, even though some of the nuance may go over your head. You're still able to follow the pictures. So I was reading a lot of Tezuka Osamu to study Japanese, and I was understanding some of it and not understanding some of it, but I was getting something out of it. And around 2003 or so, after a couple years of living in Japan and being able to speak and read Japanese at, I don't know, maybe an intermediate level, upper intermediate level, I came across this series in Japanese in a Japanese bookstore, in a bound collection in a used bookstore. Used bookstores or used comics bookstores are very common in Japan. And comics are also much cheaper in Japan than they are in the US for whatever reason. And was very excited when I came across it. because I had long been wanting to find out more information about Buddha. I've always been interested in mythology. I grew up Christian and really loved the Old Testament stories. Um, I was interested in Greek and Roman mythology. And I had been living in Japan and had been seeing images of Buddha everywhere, but never really understanding what the mythology behind it was. And I was not overly interested at the time in the philosophy per se, but I was interested in the myths. I wanted to learn what was the various myths of Buddha. So when I saw this comic book, I thought, oh, great. And I again, having grown up Christian, I was familiar with a lot of Christian material, which told the stories of the Old and New Testament in comic book form. There was the Picture Bible when I was young. There was the Pix, the weekly little magazine we got in Sunday school, which told the Bible in comic book form. There was various cartoons. If you grew up Christian, no doubt you're familiar with some of these. I'm sure it changes with the generation, but the general idea of the Bible stories being told through various cartoon or comic book medium for kids, you're no doubt familiar with. So I thought, great. This is the same thing for Buddha. It's a Buddha story in comic book for kids. And I picked it up. I bought the whole, according to Wikipedia, in the Japanese translation, it's 10 volumes, I think. I don't remember how many volumes it was, but however many it was, I bought the whole box set and took it home, and I think made it 3/4 of the way through the first volume, and just never got into the second volume, although I flipped through them. I looked at them, but didn't actually read them cover to cover. I lost interest for a couple reasons. One is it's just hard going reading this in Japanese, in a foreign language. It slowed me down, and eventually I just moved on to other things. Two is even during the first volume, this was before Wikipedia. Wikipedia didn't. When did Wikipedia come out? 2006 or something. Before I knew about Wikipedia, at any rate, I was not able to really look this up online. And back in those days, I didn't even have internet in my house, in my apartment. But I was still getting the sense that at the beginning of the story, I thought, wow, I never knew the Buddhist myth was so involved and so epic. But you get more than halfway through the first volume and you're like, this doesn't read like an ancient myth. This reads like a modern day cartoon or a modern day soap opera. So began to realize that this was not maybe as authentic as I was at first assuming. Also something I was reminded of when I came back to this series now is that Tezuka Osamu tends to have emotional punches in his book, or emotional beats in his book, which at least for me, and maybe this is a cultural difference between American media and Japanese media, or between Americans and Japanese, at least for me, just seems to hit the wrong notes. Like, his stuff could be a real downer. You get invested in characters and then they would just get killed off. There seemed to be a lot of pathos and tragedy mixed into it for no real good payoff. And again, this is where we come back to where I want to say, take me with a grain of salt. But take me with a grain of salt. But I think that could be more true of Japanese media in general. Just the Japanese movies I watched, or the Japanese books I read in translation, seem to kind of be hitting that note of pathos more than was common in American media, but it just I don't know. It just didn't. This is something, as much as I loved Tezuka Osamu's stuff, and I bought loads of his stuff when I was in Japan. Manga was very cheap to buy over there, but would often flip through it, read a bit of it, and then lose interest in it before I got to the end. Anyways, I was back in the U.S. round about 2003, 2004, and I was in a bookstore, because I love browsing bookstores when I'm back home in the U.S., and saw Tezuka Osamu's Buddha there. And this was just at the same time I had been getting into it in Japan. And I thought, oh, what a coincidence. I've just discovered this now in Japanese, and now it's just being translated and brought to a U.S. market. And I thought, a little bit of serendipity, a little bit of, isn't this lucky, or isn't this, the stars are aligning, so just at the same moment I'm discovering this in Japan, it's being brought to a U.S. audience. I also felt a little bit, this is going to sound a little bit silly to say, or it's going to make me sound like one of those hipsters, but it is, I am human, this is a natural human emotion. I felt a little bit less special. Like I had been in Japan, breaking into this Japanese culture and discovering stuff that my friends back home didn't have access to, and feeling a little bit special. And then now realizing that I'm a little bit less special because now everybody can read this. And I bought a copy back in 2003, 2004, and I remember the lady at the bookstore saying, oh, this is such a wonderful series. So many people have been getting into this. And I thought, oh okay, I'm not so special anymore. And I do get the feeling, and again, I don't know, take me with a grain of salt, or let me know what your subjective opinion is. But I feel like this series has been much more widely recognized in America, maybe, than it was in Japan. Now, according to Wikipedia, Wikipedia says that this series itself has become a staple text in Buddhist temples for young adults and teens to learn about Buddha's life. But I did not get the impression in Japan that it was overly popular. I mean, Tezuka Osamu himself is extremely popular in Japan, but he was so prolific. And after a couple of years of finding Tezuka Osamu's stuff in the bookstores, this, in Japan, in my situation, this seemed like it was a bit of a rarity find. Like this was just tucked away in a used bookstore in the middle of nowhere. It was not prominently being sold in Japan in the years when I lived there. But it seems to be much more prominently being sold in America, and seems to be one of Tezuka Osamu's more recognizable works in America. And I, again, take me with a grain of salt, but I am supposing that there's a lot of people in America, maybe like me, who are curious about Buddha, don't really know anything about Buddha, want to get to know a little bit about Buddhist mythology, or whatever, and so are attracted to the series. So maybe the series is doing much better in America than it ever did in Japan. I get that impression sometimes. Jesus, 18 minutes in, and I'm still just talking about my background with this series without getting into my thoughts. Okay. Sorry about that. I mean, but I did say at the beginning of this video I'd be rambling, didn't I? All right. So the overall view of the series. So the book one, volume one, like I said, is setting up. Volume one, we don't really even get to Buddha. I mean, Buddha is. There are some sections of volume one where we talk about the story is the birth of Buddha and his father and mother, but those are very brief asides. The main story is these other characters. It starts off with a Buddha priest, sorry, not Buddhist priest, a priest, a Brahmin, Naradatta, who's being sent by his master to find some sort of special disturbance in the force that his master senses. And he comes across a couple different characters. There's Tatya or Tata, a boy who has the ability to possess the bodies of animals. So he looks into the eyes of animals and he can transfer his soul into their body. And then there's Chapra, a slave who he and his mother are slaves, and his mother is going to be sold, and he's got to rescue his mother. And their three stories are all intersecting. While Buddha is being born off, the story of Buddha is being born is happening somewhere else, and it's just sprinkled in a little bit. So this is one of those things where I was reading this and I was thinking, I was thinking, this is like the epics of Greek mythology, where you have these generations, like the generation before the Trojan War and then the Trojan War. And I thought that this must all come from the original ancient Indian legend. But then before I really even got halfway through volume 1, I thought, oh, okay, this isn't an ancient legend. I mean, you could just tell. This is just something that Tezuka Osamu is making up. So then I thought, and again, being familiar with my background of Christian literature or Christian media, this must be like Ben-Hur or something, or a lot of other Christian media, where there's a fictional story which is running parallel and somewhat intersecting with the canonical story. But reading it through this time, and having the advantage of looking up Wikipedia, I realized that Tezuka Osamu is taking a lot of liberties with the canonical story, where you're reading through it and you're like, wow, did that really happen to Buddha? And then you look at Wikipedia and there's no evidence of this ever happening. Now, or something different happened. Now, that being said, it's a little confusing to research this on Wikipedia, and it appears, and I'm no expert at all, but it appears that whenever Wikipedia is saying anything related to Buddha, it says, okay, our earliest sources have this legend, but then this legend evolved, and there's also this sacred text which says this. And it looks like there's no kind of one canonical legend, the way there is with the Christian Bible. Oh, okay. That comparison is not entirely sound, because we do have 4 different gospels which occasionally contradict each other. So I guess we have this in Christianity to a certain extent as well. But there is a Christian tradition, right, which has tried to smooth those contradictions into one coherent narrative, which is what you get presented with in Sunday school. I get the impression maybe the same thing doesn't exist with Buddha, which is, I don't know. But it's yeah. As I've been reading this book this time around, and going through it from beginning to end, I've been checking different things with Wikipedia, and every now and again something lines up, and you're like, oh, okay, that actually lines up with the original myth, and there are quite a few things that do line up, but there's quite a few things which do not line up at all. I once read a review of a historical drama, and I forget which one it was. It was maybe the, I'm blanking on the name now, the Borgias, the Borgias TV show, which was on Showtime or something. There was a review of it on AV Club, in which they called these kind of things Wikipedia dramas. So you watch the episode, and then you go to Wikipedia to look up just how far off base from the actual history that drama was. So the drama itself may not be may have varying degrees of historical accuracy, but in this modern world, you as a viewer are combining that with your own research on Wikipedia, and then between the two of them, you're getting some sort of education out of it. And I guess that was more or less my experience reading this Buddhist manga series. And of course, Wikipedia was not around in the 70s. It wasn't even around in the early 2000s when I first tried to start reading this. But that's the experience now, or I suspect that's probably the experience with a lot of people. So between looking stuff up on Wikipedia and reading the manga, you get an education out of it one way or another. Even though the Wikipedia entries are often confusing as to what the actual legend is, at least at this point in time. Maybe in the future it'll get cleaned up a bit. Nevertheless, you get some sort of education through the combination of it. Sorry, it occurs to me maybe I should jump back and say I say that this time around I've gotten the English versions of all 8 volumes out of my school library. Have read them all over the course of a couple months, and have been reviewing each volume as I read it. So I've now read the whole thing in English. I maybe missed that important point. But yeah, that was my experience reading it. Now, in the first volumes, like I said, you're introduced to all these characters who are even before Buddha is born. And it seemed to me like it was setting it up for a really epic story. Like how is this boy Tatya, who can possess the soul of animals, how is he going to be integrated into the Buddhist legend? Or Shapra the slave. There are all these plot arcs that were set up in book 1, and I was expecting some sort of epic development of them over the course of the 8 series, and I should have known better. But maybe I think quite often, especially in the West, in English, this series is presented in kind of prestige covers. I think it's in paperback now. The version I got out of the library at my school was in paperback, but in 2003 it was in hardback. I think actually the version I bought in Japan, the collected box set, was in hardback. So it kind of looks like a prestige series, but that's the wrong way to approach this, because these plot threads which are set up in book 1 do not really pay off at all. In fact, when you get to book 8, it becomes a little bit obvious maybe that Tezuka Osamu didn't really know what he was going to do with all these characters he set up in book 1. Again, I guess it helps to remember maybe the history of this series, that it was serialized over a period of 11 years from 1972 to 1983 in these monthly magazines. And I think the way to look at it is not as one epic story, which is continued over 8 volumes, but as a series. The same way you would look at like a Batman series or a Superman series. Okay, it's not exactly the same, but you would never go back to like a Batman comic from 1972 where a character is introduced, and then compare that to where the character ended up in 1983 and say, okay, well, I'm not exactly sure that was a coherent story arc, because of course it's not, right? Each issue is doing its own thing, or maybe there are story arcs within the series. But once I once I realized that there wasn't like an overarching story arc with the narrative beats that you would expect in an epic, and that each issue was meant to be read on its own terms, as if you were buying them in the newsstands, uh, then I started to appreciate maybe what was going on a little bit more. When I was looking at this as one overall story, it did seem to me like the narrative beats were all wrong. Like characters would get set up and then they disappear for a while and then they come back. Or, yeah, I mean, the characters who are set up in book one are just a classic example of this. So much is made of the slave, Chopra, who is arguably the main character in book one, and then he just, spoiler alert, just gets killed off at the end of book one. Now, and it's a tragic beat which doesn't really seem to have any repercussions to the rest of the series. Like why? Now, I guess you could argue, as you could argue with a lot of Tezuka Osamu's stuff, that maybe the whole thing about how life seems to be suffering and pointless and all this stuff is part of the Buddhist mythology. And I don't know, maybe that's how you would interpret this. But as an American, coming to this with certain narrative expectations, I would expect that after so much buildup in book one, Chopper's storyline would either continue through the rest of the epic, or his tragic death in volume one would have serious repercussions through the rest of the series. And it really seems to be forgotten through the rest of the series. There are a couple callbacks to it later. And the same is true with Tacha, who can possess the soul of animals. He goes through kind of lots of ups and downs over the course of the series. And again, this is the point where, you know, if you're expecting a narrative arc, you're like, what's going on here? But if you're just saying, okay, this is a series, these are different issues that came out, then it makes sense that he has an up and down, and then he has another up and down. Just, you know, like Batman would have various story arcs over the course of 11 years from 1972 to 1983. But his ability to possess the body of animals just gets dropped, I don't know, about a quarter of the way through the series. And there's some sort of throwaway line about how he lost that ability maybe as he became an adult. And then I was thinking, okay, well, this is going to come back somehow. It's going to be part of his redemption, about how he gets that ability back or something. But it does not. It just gets dropped. And in the later couple books, it's completely forgotten about. Like he doesn't even make any reference to it. So yeah, as a coherent narrative, it's a mess. But as a collection of a series that was serialized and ran, it's all right. Tezuka Osamu's art, he was called the Walt Disney of Japan for a couple of reasons. One being he was just so prolific and produced so many name brands. But also for a more specific reason, he was clearly influenced by Walt Disney. He grew up watching Walt Disney cartoons, and in his early stuff, he was imitating Disney style. And you still have that very Disney-esque cartoon look of his manga, which makes it very appealing to flip through and see that very accessible cartoon style just jump out at you. Sorry, I was going to say those very bright colors, but it's all in black and white. But there seems to be a bright quality to it. The characters are kind of jumping off the page with their clear kind of Disney-esque lines. But then again, and this is true for a lot of his work, uh, the morbid quality to it, or the I mean, there is some heavy stuff in here, which seems to be in contrast to the bright qualities of it, and yeah, and I think. I don't know. This wasn't true for all of his stuff. He did write some children's stuff, which was just purely for children. But then, I mean, according to Wikipedia, I guess as his career progressed, he got more into adult themes. I'm adult here, meaning higher level themes, maybe, or I don't mean adult in the sense of pornographic. You know what I mean. Um, Although, now that I've mentioned the topic, there does seem to be kind of more openness about some sexual material in the manga in Japan than there was in the US. Well, sorry, I'm thinking out loud here. Maybe that's not true, because certainly in the US, comic books have also become more adult as the decades have progressed. Oh, okay, ignore me. I'm talking rubbish. Um, but yeah, the point being, I think maybe that disconnect between the bright colors, the cartoonish animation style, and the heavy themes, and some of the pathos of this, uh, is another potential barrier to it. And maybe the disconnect between maybe the Japanese style, which focuses more on tragedy, maybe. I'm hedging everything I say here because I'm really not certain. I'm sorting this out a bit. But I think I felt some disconnect. Even once I recognized that this was supposed to be a serialized. And I'm wondering if that is just the American, because of American Japanese cultural difference. But yeah, it's it's there were times when I found getting through all 8 volumes of this a little bit of a slog, and I'm somewhat reminded of the feelings I had when I gave up on it the first time about 20 years ago now, when I first stumbled across this book. But on the whole, I'm glad I've read it. There was some interesting stuff in here. I got a bit of an education into the Buddha myth. Now, some of that education was aided by Wikipedia, but that's how you read these things these days. Yeah, I guess those are my thoughts on it.